If you've heard the news that Banksy has been exposed, but have avoided reading about it because you know you'll just get pissed off, you've found the right video. For those who don't know, there's a person who is, by any reasonable measure, the most famous living artist in the world. The wealthy elite have bought and sold his art for tens of millions of dollars at some of the most prestigious auction houses on earth. His murals have changed the economic fate of neighborhoods and local businesses. His views on war, poverty, and political issues have reached more people than many government leaders. And yet, for decades, nobody knew who Banksy was. Sadly, that is not the case today. We know who Banksy is, and many of you probably do too. Or, at least, we all know the name that was published in a major investigation by one of the most well-respected news organizations in the world. Well, at least, they were one of the most well-respected until the public completely turned on them for what they did. But more on that later. All you need to know right now is that we will not be contributing to the doxing of a man who sprays anti-establishment imagery on walls. At no point in this video will we be saying Banksy's birth name or his current legal name. Some of you might be disappointed by this, because it's the whole reason you clicked on the video, and we get that, but hear us out for a second. Knowing his name will tell you absolutely nothing. In fact, withholding Banksy's past and current legal names from this video only leaves out a total of 4 words from the script. We made this video so that anyone who is curious can learn about what happened and how, without feeling like they are complicit in his doxing or supporting the media companies responsible. So we hope you'll keep watching this video, because what is in it is extremely interesting. How Banksy created the greatest mystery in modern art, how journalists tried and failed to dox him for 26 years, how the recent investigation finally succeeded, and why everyone's so pissed. So, let's get into it. This video is dedicated to our Brew Stacked member of the week, Bree. Thank you for your support. If you'd like to support the channel and get access to our YouTube videos ad-free, bonus content, private Discord server, and 15% discount on merch, then go to brewsolves.com and click this button to become a new member. You can also click this button to check out our new merch, and this button if you'd like to send us a suggestion for our next video topic. But now, let's get on to today's topic. In the early 1990s, Bristol was a cultural pressure cooker. It was a city still reeling from the UK economic decline of the 1980s, but buzzing with a fierce, independent, creative energy, home to a highly developed underground subculture that was covering its walls with freehand graffiti. This movement had developed its own rules, hierarchy, and language. It was a scene built on collaboration between artists and musicians operating entirely outside the law. Because it's worth remembering that graffiti was, and remains, illegal in the United Kingdom and in most other countries around the world. But among this underground scene was a young freehand graffiti artist who was part of a local gang called the Dry Bread Z Crew, or DBZ for short. But the street artists like him had a problem. Freehand graffiti takes time. You have to stand there, exposed, spraying layer after layer, blending colors, creating outlines, while consistently checking over your shoulder for the police. It requires speed, nerve, and willingness to get caught. And this young man wasn't quite fast enough. As the legend goes, he was out painting a train one night when the police showed up. His friends managed to run, disappearing into the darkness, but he was too slow. He had to dive under a garbage truck to hide. As he lay there in the dirt, heart pounding, terrified of getting arrested, he noticed something stenciled on the bottom of the truck, a serial number. That was the light bulb moment. He realized that stencils could be prepared at home safely. You could spend hours, days, cutting intricate details into a piece of cardboard. Then you just take it to the street, tape it to a wall, spray it in one solid color, and you're gone in 60 seconds. It was a smart, practical solution to a criminal problem, and it fundamentally changed the trajectory of street art and, arguably, modern art as a whole. By the late 90s, the young artist's stenciled works were appearing all over Bristol, but they were different from traditional graffiti. Back then, graffiti was almost always just tags or stylized names designed to mark territory. But what he was doing was different. Striking, humorous, and often highly politically dissonant art. Lenin on roller skates, leopards chasing police, monkeys preparing to detonate bombs. It was then that he adopted a new name, Banksy. In 1999, Banksy painted his first known large-scale wall mural, The Mild West, on a building in the Stokes Croft area of Bristol. It depicted a fluffy, adorable teddy bear preparing to throw a Molotov cocktail at 3 riot police officers armed with shields and batons. The people of Bristol loved it. It spoke to their rebellious spirit, but the authorities, not so much. As I mentioned, graffiti was and still is a crime. The police viewed him as a vandal who was defacing public property and costing the city thousands of pounds in cleanup. So, from the very beginning, Banksy's anonymity wasn't by design as a clever marketing gimmick, and it wasn't a PR strategy designed to build mystique or anything career-oriented. It was a practical, legal necessity. In the UK, depending on the cost of the damage, graffiti can carry an unlimited fine and up to 10 years in prison. If they found out who he was, he would pay a huge price and his budding art career would be over. It was that simple. But as his fame grew, that anonymity began to take on a life of its own. In 2000, Banksy held his first unofficial exhibition in London. He and some friends basically took over the Rivington Street Tunnel, transforming a dark, dingy underpass into an illicit outdoor gallery. It was one of the most unique art shows in the city's history. Word started to spread, and the questions were all the same. Who was this guy, and how was he pulling this off over and over again? That mystery became an essential part of the experience. Every new Banksy piece was like a magic trick. You'd go to sleep, and the wall would be blank. You'd wake up, and there'd be a massive, complex, multi-layered piece of political satire staring back at you. It felt like he was everywhere and nowhere. Banksy was, essentially, a phantom. But in the year 2000, Banksy made a mistake that would haunt him for the rest of his life. Even though he was notorious in the UK, he was relatively unknown outside of it, but he wanted to test himself in the big leagues. So he took a trip to New York City during Fashion Week. One morning, before dawn, Banksy was on a roof in the meatpacking district, working on his new canvas, a fashion billboard. But for the first time, he was caught in the act. 2 sex workers saw him and immediately suspected he was going to write something homophobic. The NYPD arrested him for vandalism and charged him with a misdemeanor for disorderly conduct. He was processed, fingerprinted, and forced to sit in a holding cell. It's the only known Banksy work that was never finished. To get out, he was forced to sign a handwritten confession acknowledging his guilt. He paid a $310 fine and completed 5 days of community service. At the time, it was just a minor inconvenience, a hazard of the job at most. He paid his fine, did his time picking up trash, or whatever they made him do, and went back to England. He had no idea that 26 years later, this single-signed piece of paper sitting in a dusty filing cabinet in New York would come back to haunt him. By 2003, Banksy was becoming too big for the underground. His stencils were getting more elaborate, his locations more audacious, and his message more refined and sharp. He stepped out of his usual anti-establishment lane to design the album cover for Blur's album Think Tank. His design featured 2 stenciled figures wearing vintage deep-sea diving helmets, embracing. It was a massive crossover moment. Blur was one of the biggest bands in the world at the time, and suddenly, Banksy's art was in every record store on the planet. In a way, Banksy himself was now in the living rooms of millions of people. But Banksy was never interested in playing by the art world's rules. He actively despised the elitism of galleries and museums. He hated the idea that art was something to be locked away behind glass or accessible only to the wealthy and the educated. So, he decided to mock them. In 2005, Banksy walked into London's British Museum wearing a disguise. He was carrying a lump of concrete that he had decorated to look like a prehistoric cave painting. But instead of hunting mammoths with spears, the stick figure in the painting was pushing a modern supermarket shopping trolley. He called it Peckham Rock. He casually walked into one of the galleries, found an empty space on the wall, and stuck it up with double-sided tape. He even included a fake museum identification plaque, written in the dry, academic tone of a curator. It stayed there for days. Thousands of people walked past it, assuming it was a genuine historical artifact. Museum staff allegedly only noticed the prank and took it down after seeing it featured on Banksy's own website. It was a brilliant work of art. It asked a fundamental question about the rigid views of the art establishment. Who actually gets to decide what is or isn't museum-worthy? The artist, the public, or a self-appointed group of experts in suits? Side note, the genius irony of the piece would be further proven a decade later when, after Banksy had become a global phenomenon, the British Museum formally requested Peckham Rock back and put it into their official collection. But back to 2005. Later that year, Banksy still felt the urge to go bigger, so he took his work to one of the most dangerous and politically charged places on Earth, the West Bank Separation Wall in Palestine. Banksy painted 9 massive murals on the concrete barrier. One showed a little girl being carried up and over the wall by a bunch of balloons. Another showed a scenic hole blasted through the concrete, revealing a beautifully idyllic beach on the other side. It was incredibly dangerous work. Israeli security forces reportedly fired warning shots in the air while he was painting. But the images were broadcast around the world, instantly making Banksy a global political force. Banksy had always been a political artist, but now he was being seen as an international activist with a spray can, and he decided to commit to it with a huge display. In September 2006, Banksy held a massive 3-day exhibition in a warehouse in LA. He called it Barely Legal. It was billed as a vandalized warehouse extravaganza, and it was exactly that. But the centerpiece of the show wasn't any of his paintings on the wall. It was a live, 37-year-old Indian elephant named Ty. Banksy painted the entire elephant in a pink and gold floral pattern to perfectly match the wallpaper of the room it stood in. The metaphor was literal. Cards handed out at the exhibition explain the meaning. There's an elephant in the room. There's a problem we never talk about. The fact is that life isn't getting any fairer. 20 billion people live below the poverty line. That can't be the quote. Hold on. Maybe 2 billion? The line 20 billion people live below the poverty line. I see it right there in the photo of the source link. That's exactly what it says. I'm just wondering if that was an intentional exaggeration or a typo by Banksy, because the world population is still less than 10 billion. Interesting. All right, back to it. The show was an absolute sensation. Over 30,000 people attended over 3 days, including the very kind of people whose lifestyle he was criticizing. The guest list included huge names like Brad Pitt and Angelina Jolie, Jude Law, and Keanu Reeves. Brad and Angelina reportedly dropped hundreds of thousands of dollars on Banksy pieces that weekend. Suddenly, everyone wanted a Banksy. His original canvases were being sold by others for millions at auction on the secondary market. Local councils in the UK, who had previously spent thousands of pounds scrubbing his work off walls, were now installing perspex screens to protect them. Homeowners were literally chiseling chunks of brick out of their houses to sell the Banksy murals painted on them. He was the most famous artist in the world, and somehow, nobody knew who he was. Which meant, of course, that everybody wanted to be the one to find out. The first real attempt at solving the mystery came in July 2008. The Mail on Sunday, a British tabloid not exactly known for its highbrow art criticism or nuanced cultural analysis, decided to unravel the biggest enigma in modern culture. They launched a massive investigation, deploying journalists around Bristol to dig into the local scene, interview former classmates, and track down anyone who might have been known as a young graffiti artist in the early 90s. The only thing they had to go on was a photograph taken in Jamaica in 2004 by a photographer named Peter Dean Rickards. According to Rickards, he and Banksy, who had both been working for the same record label, had a falling out when they met in Jamaica. Rickards subsequently leaked a picture of an average-looking man he claimed was Banksy, kneeling down with a spray can and stencils at his feet. The Mail took this photo and started knocking on doors in Bristol. Eventually, the journalists found people who claimed to recognize the man in the photo. The Mail on Sunday published its exposé with a massive splash. They had photos, they had interviews, and they had a name: Robbie Banks. According to their investigation, Robbie Banks was privately educated at a prestigious public school in England. And just to clarify for our non-British viewers, in England, a public school actually means a highly exclusive, expensive private school. Yes, public school is private school. It makes no sense. The writer of this video is British, and even he had to check 4 different websites to make absolutely sure. Anyway, the tabloid leaned heavily into this contradiction. They loved the irony. The gritty, anti-establishment outlaw was actually a preppy, privately educated kid from the nice neighborhood. To prove their theory, the journalists tracked down the supposed parents of the man who they believed to be Banksy, showing up at their home with the 2004 Jamaica photograph. The man's alleged father looked at it and flatly denied that it was his son. His alleged mother agreed, not their son. But instead of accepting that they might have got the wrong guy, the Mail on Sunday presented the parents' denial as proof of a family-supported cover-up. In attempts to give further credence to their theory, they traced Robbie's movements from Bristol to London, showing how his residential address vaguely matched with the sudden appearances of Banksy murals in those neighborhoods. It was the first time a major publication had definitively pointed a finger at a specific individual. They laid out the evidence piece by piece, expecting to pull back the curtain and expose the great wizard. But if you actually looked at their proof, it was incredibly flimsy. It was a theory built on a single, grainy photograph of a man alleged by a disgruntled individual to be Banksy, a handful of vague quotes from people who hadn't seen Robbie Banks in a decade, and the fact that Robbie happened to live in London the same time as Banksy was painting there. Yeah. Him and 8 million other people. And the public's reaction? A collective, resounding shrug. Banksy, of course, never confirmed or denied the report. His authentication agency, Pest Control, simply ignored it. It worked well for him. The art world kept turning, and the value of his art just kept rising. And for the next decade, he used his anonymity to pull off some of the most audacious stunts in the history of art. But his next big project was not what anyone expected. In 2010, Banksy released his first feature film, a documentary called Exit Through the Gift Shop. It premiered at the Sundance Film Festival, billed as a documentary entirely about the street art scene. But true to form, Banksy flipped the script. The film wasn't really about him at all. It was about a French immigrant living in Los Angeles named Terry Guetta. According to the film, Terry was an eccentric, slightly bumbling guy who became obsessively compelled to film street artists at work. He spent years following artists like Shepard Fairey and Space Invader, always holding a video camera, always in the background. Eventually, he even managed to film Banksy himself. But then, the documentary takes a bizarre turn. Encouraged by Banksy, Terry decides to put down the camera and become a street artist himself. He adopts the moniker Mr. Brainwash. Despite having almost no actual artistic talent, Terry hires a massive production team, utilizes a genius marketing campaign, and throws a massive exhibition in LA. He ends up selling millions of dollars worth of derivative, mass-produced pop art to wealthy collectors. Through this, the film portrays a deeply cynical message about the commercialization of art. Watching as a complete amateur became an overnight sensation solely because he had the right connections and branding. The film was critically acclaimed and earned an Academy Award nomination for Best Documentary Feature. But as soon as it came out, a new theory began to spread. People watched the film and realized the narrative was almost too perfect. It felt too constructed, and they started to ask a very logical question. What if the whole thing was fake? What if Exit Through the Gift Shop wasn't a documentary at all, but a mockumentary, a feature-length prank directed by the ultimate prankster? The theory suggested that Mr. Brainwash was an elaborate character created by Banksy to prove a point. By inventing a fake artist and watching the art world throw millions of dollars at him, Banksy was demonstrating that collectors would buy literally anything if they were told it was cool. But the theory went even deeper. If Mr. Brainwash was a character, who was playing him? Suddenly, people started looking at Terry Guetta in a completely new light. What if this goofy, eccentric French guy wasn't just an actor hired by Banksy? What if Terry Guetta was Banksy? Think about it for a second. It was the perfect cover. If you're an illegal street artist who needs to scope out locations and hang around active graffiti sites without arousing suspicion from the police, what better disguise than pretending to be a harmless, enthusiastic documentary filmmaker? You're just the guy with the camera. You're allowed to be there. The thick French accent, the bumbling persona, the obsessive filming, it could easily be a Borat-style character. A brilliant piece of performance art hiding the greatest street artist in the world in plain sight. When journalists pressed Terry Guetta on the theory, he deliberately avoided giving a definitive answer. They can find out when all is revealed. In life, everything comes out in the end. Now is not the right time, but time will tell, and it will be a big surprise. I'm not being cryptic, he says after saying the most cryptic thing ever. But the art world loved this theory. It elevated Banksy from a mere graffiti artist to a master performance artist and filmmaker. It meant his trick of always remaining in the shadows was even deeper and more complex than anyone seemed to realize before now. When it came time for the Academy Awards ceremony, it too became a bit of a circus. Banksy requested permission to attend the Oscars in disguise, but the Academy, terrified of a live television stunt that they couldn't control, quickly refused. The film ultimately didn't win the Oscar. In hindsight, that was probably a good thing for the producer who would have had to accept the award. It would have led to a decade of theories about him being Banksy too. At this point, maintaining the mystery was no longer about just avoiding arrest. It was a core component of the Banksy brand. His anonymity was the engine driving his fame. Because nobody knew who he was, everybody could be him. But then, in February 2013, it seemed the mystery was finally over. A bombshell press release was published online, appearing to originate from the BBC. It announced that Banksy had been arrested in a massive early morning police sting in London. The report was incredibly detailed. It included quotes from the London police chief, Wayne Leppard, confirming that Banksy had been apprehended by the Anti-Graffiti Task Force, and he was currently being held without bail on charges of vandalism, conspiracy, and counterfeiting. Most importantly, the press release gave the world a name. The release said that Banksy was a 39-year-old man from Bristol named Paul William Horner. The news exploded. Major outlets like Jezebel and Complex picked up the story. Millions more shared it on social media. The internet went into complete meltdown over the unmasking of Paul Horner. But when Business Insider contacted the London Metropolitan Police for comment, the police had no idea what they were talking about. Because, actually, this massive sting never happened. The whole story had been fake. Not only had there not been a police sting, but there was no London police chief named Wayne Leppard, and Paul Horner was never actually Banksy. He was a notorious internet troll who ran a fake news website and inserted his own name into fake stories about everything from swatting to a Big Lebowski sequel. Even the briefest bit of fact-checking would have revealed the truth. Even the email address on the original press release belonged to a satire site. But the public and the media swallowed it whole. And then, 1 year later, in 2014, it happened again. Another viral hoax claimed Banksy had been arrested and unmasked as Paul Horner. But this time, the source was an American satire site, the National Report. Banksy did not bother to give any of these allegations a response. Like every other theory, they came and went, leaving the artist with a firmer footing in the collective consciousness than ever. Besides, he had work to do. In August 2015, Banksy pulled off his most ambitious physical project yet. He secretly took over a derelict outdoor swimming pool complex in the British seaside town of Weston-super-Mare, not far from Bristol. He transformed it into Dismaland, a temporary bemusement park and family theme park unsuitable for children. It was a dark, dystopian parody of Disneyland containing 10 new works: a ruined Cinderella castle, a Grim Reaper riding a bumper car to the tune of Stayin' Alive, and a pond full of remote-controlled migrant boats that visitors could steer around floating bodies, to name a few. It was a massive logistical undertaking involving 58 different artists from around the world. The fact that he managed to build an entire theme park in secret and hire hundreds of construction workers, security guards, and staff without any one of them leaking his identity was, and remains, staggering. It proved that Banksy's inner circle was incredibly tight, disciplined, and loyal. But Dismaland also inadvertently provided a clue that fueled the next great identity theory. The legendary Bristol band Massive Attack had been scheduled to play a concert at Dismaland, but eventually dropped out due to technical issues. But this connection caught the attention of an investigative journalist named Craig Williams. Williams started looking at the overlap between Banksy and Massive Attack, and he noticed something strange. Over the past decade, whenever Massive Attack went on tour, new Banksy murals seemed to magically appear in the exact same cities, usually just days before or after the band played there. Melbourne, San Francisco, New Orleans, Toronto, Boston. The timeline was too perfect to be a coincidence. Williams looked at Robert Del Naya, a founding member of Massive Attack. Born in Bristol, where Banksy got his start, Robert was a pioneer of the Bristol graffiti scene in the 1980s, operating under the tag 3D. Banksy had explicitly cited 3D as one of his biggest early influences, writing in one of his books that he had looked up to him as a kid. Robert was also a visual artist who designed all of Massive Attack's album covers. The theory was exciting. What if the world's most famous anonymous artist was actually the frontman of one of the world's most famous electronic bands? The Robert Del Naya is Banksy theory exploded. It made so much sense. It explained how Banksy could travel the world so easily without arousing suspicion. He was just on tour with his band. It explained how he had the funds to pull off massive stunts. And it explained why his art was so deeply tied to the Bristol music scene. The pressure got so intense that Robert Del Naya was forced to publicly address it in an interview with the Daily Mail. Rumors of my secret identity are greatly exaggerated. It would be a good story, but sadly not true. Wishful thinking, I think. He later clarified to a newspaper that Banksy was just a mate who occasionally came to Massive Attack gigs. But the internet wasn't convinced. For years, Robert Del Naya remained the prime suspect in the court of public opinion. For them, he was the cool, edgy answer to the mystery. Meanwhile, the scientific community decided they wanted a crack at solving it. In 2016, researchers at Queen Mary University of London published a peer-reviewed academic study titled Tagging Banksy. They used a technique called geographic profiling, originally developed by criminologist Kim Rosmo, to track down serial killers and terrorists. The researchers took the precise coordinates of 140 different Banksy artworks in London and Bristol. They fed this data into a complex mathematical model designed to find the anchor point, the home or workplace of the person committing the acts. The theory is that criminals, or in this case, graffiti artists, tend to operate in areas they are familiar with, radiating out from a central hub. The algorithm crunched the numbers and spat out a cluster of addresses, and it turned out that those specific addresses for family homes, pubs, and other places matched perfectly with the residence of one specific person, Robbie Banks. Science now backed up the 2008 Mail on Sunday tabloid investigation. The math said he was the guy. Banksy's legal team intervened and delayed the publication of the study for a short time, citing concerns about how the data was being used and whether it constituted a privacy breach against the individual accused of being Banksy. But, regardless of these legitimate concerns, the study was eventually published in the Journal of Spatial Science. And once again, the world read the headline, looked at the name in the article, and collectively decided to ignore it. People weren't overly interested in the attempts of a mathematical model to ruin something that is uniquely human, a good magic trick. Meanwhile, Banksy was busy planning the greatest magic trick in the history of the art market. It was October 5th, 2018, the Contemporary Art Evening auction at Sotheby's in London. The room was packed with the world's wealthiest collectors, phone bidders from across the globe, and an army of auction house staff in tailored suits. The final lot of the night was a 2006 canvas version of Banksy's most famous image, Girl with Balloon. It was housed in a thick, heavy, ornate Victorian-style frame that Banksy himself had provided. The bidding was fierce. It climbed past the estimates, eventually hammering down at £1.04 million. That's over $1.3 million. The auctioneer brought down the gavel. The room erupted in polite, wealthy applause. The sale was finalized. And then, an alarm started ringing. Inside the heavy wooden frame, a hidden mechanism whirred to life. To the absolute horror and astonishment of everyone in the room, the canvas began to slowly slide downwards, passing through a shredder built into the bottom of the frame. The bottom half of the $1 million painting emerged in neat, uniform strips, dangling beneath the frame like a bizarre fringe. The room descended into chaos. Technicians rushed to the painting, pulling it off the wall. Auction house executives stared in open-mouthed shock as people whipped out their phones to record the disaster. Banksy had just destroyed his own masterpiece, live in the middle of one of the most prestigious, secure auction houses on Earth. He later released a video explaining that he had secretly built the shredder into the frame years earlier, in case it was ever put up for auction. He also revealed that the mechanism had actually malfunctioned. It was supposed to shred the entire canvas, but it got stuck halfway through, leaving the top half of the balloon intact. The stunt was meant to be a massive middle finger to the commodification of art, but the art market is a strange thing. It doesn't play by normal rules. It has an unending ability to absorb criticism and somehow still turn it into profit. By shredding the painting, Banksy hadn't destroyed its value at all. He had created a brand new, entirely unique piece of performance art. The buyer, a European female collector, decided to keep the partially shredded piece. It was officially renamed by Banksy's authentication agency Pest Control as Love is in the Bin. 3 years later, in 2021, Love is in the Bin went back up for auction. It sold for over 14 times its original value at £18.6 million. He had unintentionally proven that the art market was absurd, that the prices were arbitrary, and that the people buying his work didn't actually understand what it meant. But something else happened that day that those who were still trying to unmask Banksy cared about most. When that alarm went off at Sotheby's and the painting started to shred, the room was full of people. An art dealer was trying to take a photo of the shredded painting when he noticed something odd. There was a man standing in front of him, blocking the view. The dealer noticed that this eccentric-looking man wasn't even looking at the painting. He was looking at the crowd. When he went back to look at the photos later, the dealer noticed that this man had a camera built into the bridge of his glasses. He suddenly realized that Banksy had been there the whole time, and now the dealer had a photo. Journalists asked him for the picture, but the dealer always said the same thing. I don't want to be the guy who exposes Banksy. But that didn't stop the journalists, of course. In September 2020, during the height of the global pandemic lockdowns, a new theory caught fire on social media. Someone noticed that Banksy artworks seemed to appear in cities where a heavy metal band called Marseille had performed, and the lead guitarist of Marseille, Neil Buchanan, had an interesting connection to art. If you grew up in the UK in the 90s, you know exactly who Neil Buchanan is. But for those who aren't familiar, Buchanan was the beloved, relentlessly enthusiastic host of the children's television show Art Attack. For 17 years, he taught millions of kids how to paint, draw, and build crafts out of cardboard and PVA glue. But his signature segment was the Big Art Attack, where he would go out into a field or onto a tarmac and use everyday objects like old clothes, sandbags, and tires to create massive, large-scale artworks that could only be properly viewed from a camera high above. The idea that this wholesome, charismatic children's TV presenter was secretly sneaking out at night to paint subversive political graffiti was too incredible to resist. The internet went wild. It became a massive trending topic. People started making side-by-side comparisons of art attack projects and Banksy murals. Under videos of the big art attacks, commenters started running with it. The theory got so big that Buchanan was forced to issue an official, emphatic denial on his website, stating clearly, Neil Buchanan isn't Banksy. It was absurd, but it proved a point. The public was so desperate to preserve the myth of Banksy that they were willing to believe a children's TV host was an international art criminal, rather than accepting the boring and more likely reality of it being a twice-exposed nobody from Bristol. But then came along the journalist at Reuters. They didn't care about the joy of a good mystery. They didn't care about privacy and anonymity. They only cared about being the ones to definitively reveal the man behind the legend. And they didn't, for 1 second, think about what the repercussions of their actions might be. In November 2022, a series of haunting murals began appearing on bombed-out buildings in Ukraine. They appeared in places like Irpin and Borodyanka, towns located around 35 miles northwest of the capital, Kyiv. While the active front lines of the war had shifted to the east and south by that point, these towns had been the site of brutal fighting and Russian occupation earlier in the year. The buildings Banksy was using were battered by artillery fire and airstrikes. One showed a gymnast doing a perfect handstand on the jagged rubble of a destroyed building in Borodianka. Another showed a small boy flipping a man in a judo match. Another, depicting two children, incorporated a real metal tank trap as a seesaw. Another showed a woman in a dressing gown, hair in curlers, wearing a gas mask, and holding a fire extinguisher. It was classic Banksy. Powerful, poignant, visually striking, and placed in one of the most dangerous and politically charged environments imaginable. It was a statement of solidarity with the Ukrainian people, broadcast to the world through the medium of spray paint. But war zones are not easy places to sneak into. You can't just hop on a budget airline with a backpack full of spray paint and a stencil. You have to cross heavily fortified borders and pass through military checkpoints. You have to show your passport to armed guards. You have to register with the local authorities. In short, you have to leave a pretty long paper trail. Simon Gardner, James Pearson, and Blake Morrison, a team of investigative journalists at Reuters, decided to follow that trail. They saw an opportunity to finally crack the code and give the people what they want, a name. The Reuters team traveled to Horenka, a town near Kyiv where one of the murals had been painted on the side of a ruined apartment block. They interviewed locals who had been there when the painting happened. Those witnesses described 3 men arriving in an ambulance, which was being used as a makeshift transport vehicle. 2 of the men were wearing masks to conceal their faces. One was unmasked, a man with 1 arm and 2 prosthetic legs. The 3 men had cardboard stencils. They taped them to a wall, grabbed cans of spray paint, and got to work. Within minutes, they had created a piece of art, a bearded man in a bathtub, and then they were gone. The journalists showed a photo lineup to the locals. They included pictures of various suspects, including Robert Del Naya, but they also included that old picture of Robbie Banks in Jamaica. One of the locals had seen the 2 painters without their masks. She had made coffee for them. Yet, when she was shown photos of Robbie, Robert, or any of the other hypothesized Banksys, she didn't recognize any of them. But the Reuters journalists still had some clues to follow. A source had revealed that the men had been escorted by Giles Dooley, a well-known and highly respected conflict photographer who had lost an arm and both legs to an improvised explosive device in Afghanistan years earlier. Dooley had also previously worked with Massive Attack. If Robert Del Naya was in Ukraine, then it would only make him more likely. Soon enough, the Reuters journalists got a call. A source was excited to tell them that they just saw Del Naya at a hotel in Kyiv. The Reuters journalists immediately pulled on that thread. They started digging into immigration records and border crossings. They knew roughly when the murals had been painted based on when photos first started appearing on social media, so they looked for anyone entering Ukraine around that time who fit the profile of the artist or his known associates. And they found a hit. On October 28, 2022, 3 British men crossed into Ukraine together shortly before the Banksy murals appeared. The first was Giles Dooley. The second man was Robert Del Naya, the guy everyone thought was Banksy a decade before. And the third man was traveling under a very common, very boring name. A source told them the date of birth on that man's passport, and turns out it was the same as Robbie Banks. Reuters now had a direct link. The journalists started digging into public records in the UK, cross-referencing birth dates, property deeds, and corporate registries. They discovered that around 2008, right after the Mail on Sunday published their initial expose, Robbie Banks had legally changed his name. But he didn't pick something flashy or artistic. He didn't pick a cool pseudonym. He picked the most aggressively boring, untraceable name imaginable. Think John Smith, for example. There were thousands of men with his name now. By changing his name, he effectively vanished into a sea of statistical noise. He had made himself practically invisible to standard background checks. But it wasn't enough to hide from a team of dedicated Reuters investigators with global resources. The journalists now had a mountain of circumstantial evidence. They had the name change, they had the immigration records, but they needed something definitive, something that tied the man to the crimes in a way that couldn't be dismissed as hearsay or mistaken identity. Because, legally speaking, graffiti is still a crime. They found what they were looking for in New York City. Buried in the archives of the New York City Police Department was the police report from the year 2000. A young British man had been arrested for vandalism and disorderly conduct during New York Fashion Week. He had been caught spray painting a building. The suspect had been processed, fingerprinted, fined $310, and ordered to complete 5 days of community service. Ring any bells? Specifically, remember how, as a part of the plea deal to avoid jail time in the US, Banksy had been forced to sign a handwritten confession acknowledging his guilt. The journalists pulled the file. They looked at the signature of the confession. It was scrawled and sloppy. They couldn't identify the last name. But when they looked at the court papers, they saw it typed out. It was Robbie Banks. Except, not really. If you haven't guessed by now, this is a fake name that we've decided to use to refer to the man photographed in Jamaica. Robbie is actually a name that Banksy himself used as a misdirection during an interview with BBC in 2003.
Are you happy for me to use your name? And the Independent has. Yeah. Is it Robert Banks?
It's Robbie.
Robbie, okay.
So we thought it was as good a name as any to use in place for his real birth name that was revealed when the Mail on Sunday doxed him back in 2008. And now, Reuters had confirmed this birth name to be Banksy's, as well as revealing the name he had legally changed to. Combined with immigration records from Ukraine, name change documents, witness testimonies, and the 2016 geographical profiling study, the case was closed. It was beyond a reasonable doubt. The Reuters team reached out to Banksy's authentication agency, Pest Control, to present their findings and request comment. Pest Control replied with a terse statement saying they had decided to say nothing. But Banksy's lawyer, Mark Stevens, did reply. He sent a lengthy legal letter to Reuters. He told them that his client does not accept that many of the details contained within your inquiry are correct. He urged them not to publish the story, arguing that doing so would violate the artist's privacy, interfere with his art, and put him in danger. Reuters weighed the ethical considerations. They debated whether unmasking an artist was in the public interest. Ultimately, according to them, they decided that because Banksy is a figure of massive global influence who shapes political discourse, who sells art for tens of millions of dollars, and who operates in active war zones, he was a legitimate target for journalistic scrutiny. On March 13, 2026, Reuters published its investigation. It was a massive 8,000-word special report. It was meticulously sourced, legally bulletproof, and utterly definitive. They laid out the timeline, court documents, immigration records, and witness quotes. Against all the odds, they had finally done it. They had unmasked the Phantom. They had solved the greatest mystery in modern art. But if Reuters expected a Pulitzer Prize and a parade, they were severely mistaken. Because the moment the article went live, the internet didn't celebrate their work. It revolted. The backlash was immediate. It was global, and it was vicious. People weren't just disappointed that Reuters had destroyed the mystery, they were actively furious at Reuters for doxing a man for no reason. Graffiti is still illegal, and Banksy has technically committed millions of dollars worth of property damage over his career. By publishing his birth name and his current legal name, Reuters was theoretically opening him up to prosecution by every city council, property owner, and transit authority he had ever painted on. But the anger went deeper than just legal concerns. It was a fundamental rejection of the premise that Banksy needed to be unmasked. One of the Reuters reporters, Blake Morrison, did an Ask Me Anything session on Reddit to discuss the investigation and the journalistic process behind it. If he was expecting an enthusiastic, thought-provoking conversation with the community, he must have been surprised. Users flooded the thread with hostile questions. They demanded to know what the public interest was in ruining a man's anonymity. They questioned Reuters' morality. Some even accused them of trying to distract the public from more important political issues. Blake tried to defend the piece by using standard journalistic ethics, saying, "The public has a deep interest in understanding someone with such profound influence on culture, art, and political discourse. We applied Reuters' standard principle. Those who shape social and political discourse are subject to scrutiny, accountability, and sometimes unmasking." But the public wasn't buying it. Blake was obviously eviscerated by the commenters. The thread had 0 upvotes, and every reply he gave was downvoted to oblivion. As one Reddit user succinctly put it, "You keep saying public interest, but you never explain what the public actually gains from knowing his identity." And they had a point. Knowing that Banksy is a man from Bristol who changed his name to hide from journalists who had already doxed him 14 years ago doesn't add anything valuable. It doesn't change the impact of the mural on a bombed-out building in Ukraine. It doesn't make his commentary on the West Bank wall any more or less valid. At best, it just ruins the fun in the fundamental magic trick that was Banksy. And at worst, it robs a man of his anonymity. Anonymity that Mark Stevens, Banksy's lawyer, argued was essential for the art itself, saying, "Working anonymously or under a pseudonym serves vital societal interests. It protects freedom of expression by allowing creators to speak truth to power without fear of retaliation, censorship, or persecution." Reuters ignored him. They published anyway, convinced they were doing a public service by revealing the truth. And then, in their rush to break the story, the media claimed yet another victim. When the Reuters story broke, several other news outlets, including the New York Post, The Sun, and Lad Bible, scrambled to aggregate the news. They wanted a face to go with the name. They wanted a picture of the unmasked Banksy to put on their homepages to drive clicks. They searched their photo archives and found a picture of a 69-year-old, gray-haired man wearing glasses standing in front of a Banksy mural in London. The photo had been taken a few years earlier during a news segment about the mural. The outlets published the photo, claiming, or heavily implying, that this was the newly unmasked Banksy. What a shocking good turn of luck for them that they had the photo in their library this whole time, right? Only they didn't, because the man in the photo wasn't Banksy at all. The man's name was George Giorgio. He was a maintenance man from London. His son happened to own the building where the mural was painted, and George had just been standing there supervising the installation of a plastic sheet to protect the artwork from vandals when a photographer snapped his picture. It could not have been a more absurd mistake. But suddenly, George Giorgio's face was plastered across the global internet as the world's most wanted artist. He started receiving up to 30 phone calls a day. Reporters were hounding him. Strangers were harassing him on the street, asking for autographs or demanding to know why he painted certain things. "I'm not Banksy," he had to tell Reuters in a video call days later. "I'm a maintenance man. It's an old joke now. I'd like people to get on with it now and leave me alone." Reuters had to publish a formal fact-check article debunking the other newspaper's claims, trying to clean up the mess that their own investigation had inadvertently caused. It was a chaotic, embarrassing end to a 30-year mystery. The Great Doxxing hadn't brought clarity or understanding. It had only brought anger, harassment, and a profound sense of disappointment for everyone. Reuters, like the Mail on Sunday a decade before, completely misread the room on what the people actually wanted, and they did not understand what Banksy represented. Before him, graffiti was almost universally viewed as a symptom of urban decay. City councils spent millions every year sandblasting walls and prosecuting teenagers. Graffiti was a nuisance. It was a sign that the authorities had lost control of a neighborhood. Banksy changed all of that. He turned street art into just art. He took the visual language of vandalism and used it to articulate the anxieties of the modern world. And in doing so, he created what sociologists and art historians now call the Banksy effect. The Banksy effect is the phenomenon in which an act of vandalism suddenly becomes a protected cultural asset. In 2014, a youth club in Bristol, Broad Plains Boys Club, was struggling to keep its doors open. They needed £120,000 to survive. One night, Banksy painted a mural on a piece of plywood attached to a doorway near the club. It depicted a couple embracing while checking their mobile phones, titled Mobile Lovers. The manager of the youth club, desperate for funds, took a crowbar, removed the plywood, and brought it inside the club, charging people a small donation to view it. The local city council immediately confiscated the artwork, claiming it belonged to the city because it was on public property. They wanted to put it into a museum, effectively abandoning the youth club entirely. The situation was only resolved when Banksy himself, still entirely anonymous, wrote a letter to the youth club manager explicitly gifting the artwork to him. The club sold it to a private collector for over £400,000, saving the organization from bankruptcy. This is the power of the Phantom. He was acting as a rogue philanthropist, redistributing wealth by simply applying paint to wood. He was a modern-day Robin Hood, stealing value from the abstract concept of the art market and giving it to a struggling youth center to survive. But this power only works because of the myth. If Robbie Banks, local graffiti guy, had walked into that youth club and handed them a check for £400,000, it would have been a nice local news story. But because the Phantom reached out from the shadows to intervene in what was almost definitely going to be a legal dispute, it became a global sensation. The Reuters investigation stripped away all of that mythic power. By reducing Banksy to a legal name, a date of birth, and an arrest record, they anchored him into the mundane reality of the legal system. They turned a symbol into a citizen. And individual citizens are far less powerful than symbols. A citizen can be arrested or sued for property damage or audited by the tax authorities. A citizen can be harassed on the street by people who disagree with their politics. A symbol doesn't have to worry about any of those things. This, I think, is why people are truly so incensed about what Reuters did. Not only did it ruin the mystery, but it was a betrayal of everything he stood for. In his 2002 book, Existentialism, Banksy wrote, "Like most people, I have a fantasy that all the little powerless losers will gang up together, that all the vermin will get some good equipment, and then the underground will go overground and tear the city apart." For 30 years, Banksy was the king of the vermin. He was the powerless loser who beat the system. He broke the law, he mocked the rich, he forced the art establishment to play by his rules, and he got away with it. He made fools of the police, the auction houses, and the critics. For 30 years, Banksy refused to be controlled. He built a parallel universe where the establishment's rules didn't apply. He created a space where art could be dangerous, illegal, and wildly valuable all at the same time. Reuters dragged him back into our universe. They applied the rules of journalism, rules designed to hold powerful people accountable, to an artist whose entire project was about doing things that those rules didn't allow. The unmasking by Reuters was, in many ways, the ultimate victory of the establishment over the underground. The one thing Banksy always fought. The Reuters investigation was an incredible piece of journalism. From a purely investigative standpoint, it was a masterpiece. But in a world of incredible division, war, and corruption, exposing an artist causing nobody any harm was an incredibly misguided and pointless thing to waste time and resources on. Some of you might be annoyed or confused that I keep referring to Banksy's works as magic tricks, but I truly believe he is a magician. A magician's job is to take something expected or normal and make it into something extraordinary. The artist does the same thing on a canvas. The physical art itself is only one half of the equation. The other is the meaning, mystery, or magic behind it. Very few of us ever wanted the truth about Banksy's identity. We, perhaps unconsciously, wanted to help create the illusion. We wanted to believe that in a world where everything is tracked, monetized, and surveilled, someone could still operate completely off-grid. Exposing him broke that illusion. When the wizard is finally pulled from behind the curtain, he's always just a man. The truth behind a great mystery is often so simple and ordinary that it can't help but disappoint. The fun is in the journey to trying to figure it out yourself, or even better, allowing the artist to tell their own story on their own terms. Nobody knows what Banksy will do next, if he will do anything at all. But I'd like to think most of us who have heard his real name will choose to forget it until he chooses to embrace it himself. There's a well-quoted monologue from The Prestige that sums up not only what Banksy did so well, but what Reuters and other journalists never understood. Now, if I remember right, The Illusionist was the Edward Norton film, and The Prestige was the Hugh Jackman film with, Batman's butler. What's his name? Michael Caine. The magician takes the ordinary something and makes it do something extraordinary. Now you're looking for the secret, but you won't find it. Because of course, you're not really looking. You don't really want to know. You want to be fooled. Something like that. If you liked the sound of some of the music you heard in today's video, then check out Dusk on YouTube or Bandcamp, where you can download all of their music for free or with a donation. Dusk makes some pretty banger AI-free bops, and they were nice enough to let us use them in this video, so check them out. Links in the description. Thanks for sticking around till the end of the video. We hope you enjoyed it. If you did and want to help get the almighty algorithm to suggest it to more people, hit the like button and subscribe to our channel. If you enjoyed it so much that you want to help make sure that we are able to keep making more videos, here are 2 ways you can help support the channel, and both are at brewsolves.com. On our website, you'll find a link to become a Brew Stacked member. Stacked is a platform similar to Patreon, except it takes a smaller cut from creators' donations while still providing the same service. For as little as $5 a month, you'll get access to behind-the-scenes updates, ad-free versions of our YouTube videos, bonus videos that we wouldn't be able to post on YouTube, and 15% discount on merch. At $10, you'll become an honorary member of the Brew Crew and get access to our private Discord server and exclusive merch. Speaking of merch, also over at brewsolves.com, we have a link to our first ever merch drop. We've got some high quality t-shirts made with 100% organic cotton and a crew neck. Think of it like a donation to help keep our content free with a cool piece of merch from us as a thank you. If any of that is beyond your means, then you can also help us by simply watching another video, like this one, about a mother who took justice into her own hands and hunted and killed members of one of Mexico's most violent drug cartels. Thank you to our top tier members, Nexus and Xander, and all our other generous Stacked members for helping keep this channel going. See you all in the next one.